As you can see, today we're going to be talking about a lesson that I cleverly titled, Built Upon a Rock, that I want to relate to you, to the students, to my LDS audience. I'll say lots of things but being recorded. And we're going to be talking today about establishing clear objectives to produce powerful assignments. We'll be talking about what is an objective, what is an assignment, and what are kind of their relationships. And before we really begin, I want to establish right off the bat what are my objectives, because that's what a good teacher does. They use objectives, and they make sure their students understand those. So there's a type of relationship. And we're going to be talking about relationships a little bit to kind of get things going. So if you refer to the whiteboard, these are our objectives for the day, and really kind of for this entire lesson, and if you want to take it a step further for your entire life. So the objectives for today is that you, the learners, can construct and teach clear objectives, outcomes to your future students. You need to know what is an objective. What is a good objective? What is a bad objective? And the second point is provide examples of assignments to optimize student learning. Why are we here in school? To waste our time? I don't think so. We're here in school so that student learning can happen. And we need to think of examples. Look at perhaps some bad examples, critique them, and then come up with good ones so that student learning can happen. So, I have 25 minutes? Good. So, as I said, outcomes. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're all about. What do you notice about this picture? What are some of your comments? What do you like about it?
Usually you're facing in, but this picture's facing out.
That's a good point. Kind of a different perspective.
It's kind of centered. It's not something that we can focus on.
Excellent. So that's what outcomes do. Outcomes, they center us. And it's written, as you can see, in different color. And you have these different assignments, you have these different things. They all bleed back into the center. That's what the center is about. All of this. So, before we jump into outcomes, I want to talk a little bit about relationships. Turn to your partner. I know there's 5 of us, but talk about some relationships that you have.
Friends.
That was quick. Keep it those best on.
Classmate.
So, can I have a couple people share? What type of relationships do you have?
Teacher and friend, teacher and student.
Fantastic. That's the one we're actually going to focus on today. It's the teacher-student relationship. Super pivotal. But what are some other relationships that we have?
Family relationships.
Family relationships. Brothers and sisters, siblings, co-workers, friends. What do all these kind of relationships have in common? They're very positive. Okay, go use the restroom.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Sorry. What do all these relationships have in common? We talk about very positive relationships. At least those are the examples you provide.
It's a two-way street relationship.
Good, good. So you have two different parties, and they work together. And I would say, with family members, with friends, co-workers even, and what this lesson is kind of based on, the student-teacher relationship has to be built on trust. If there's no trust, student learning can't happen. It just, from the textbook from which I drew this lesson from, it says, but you can only teach the knowledge and skills if you have built a caring relationship and have created a safe, organized classroom. That's what we're about. About laying foundations. Going back to the title, Built Upon a Rock. It's a scriptural reference. A scriptural reference I believe we all know well from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And we're all about building that foundation. We want to be the wise man built upon the rock. We don't want to be the foolish man. Or woman. We have perspective. But We want to have good things in common. Let's look at this little cartoon. What do you notice?
Everybody's looking at the clock. They're wondering what time this class is going.
And what is the implication there?
The teacher is the one that's looking at the clock. Usually it's the student.
But you notice both of them here. This is kind of an example of a bad relationship, where perhaps both of them have the same kind of objective, is just to get through this class. And oh my goodness, why is that clock going backwards? This class is taking way too long. Another point, she's doing math. Bad choice.
I think
Yes?
he's not good at time management
Mhm.
as a teacher, and they are not on the same page. And they're thinking about others.
Exactly, that's definitely part of it. Here, that's an example of what we would say is kind of like a bad objective and a bad assignment. Like, look, she's doing something, she's showing her students a different equation, hoping for them to gain mastery. But instead of that happening, it's the inverse is occurring. She's lost attention, the students lost attention, everyone's lost. And who suffers? When we come down to it, everyone, but really the students. Teachers are here to help the students. They're all about students, student learning, and all that jazz. So, and if you look on her board, there's no objectives. The students have no idea what they're supposed to be learning, what they're supposed to do with this equation. It's just a matter of, just come on, just 3 o'clock, 10 minutes away, really close. So that's why objectives, going back to what she lists, that they provide some type of direction, they provide a center. So this is the type of relationship we want as teachers and students. We want a student who's diligently working, and a teacher kind of there as a mentor, who's helping the student discover for themselves kind of the pathways of learning. As kind of Dr. Shute was saying, kind of synthesizing different kind of branches of information. But we have different opinions on not just outcomes, but also assignments. Can someone read this for me?
Keep calm and complete the bloody assignments.
So, this could definitely be told to the students. I kind of took this from like a teacher's perspective. So, come on students, taught you the lesson, gave you the assignment, now just do it. Stop complaining.
This is how I felt today about business management.
Wonderful. So we can
And
do
I have
all.
to really keep
What's
calm.
killing us?
And is that the purpose of assignment? Not to critique this whole lesson plan, but what do you think an assignment should do? Really, from your experience, from your perspective.
Popular.
Help you learn. Okay, that's one.
Challenging the students because they can grow.
Okay, good. Exactly. But it could be challenging without allowing student learning to actually happen. It could be so challenging or so kind of vague and obtuse that the students don't know what to do, or they don't know why they're doing it. Sometimes the objectives, which kind of the focus of this lesson, is the why of teaching. Why do we do what we do? Like when a teacher gets up in front of a classroom, they need to ask themselves a question, or better yet, going off our wonderful assignment that we had to do for today. Lesson plan, the moment a teacher sits down, you need to say, what do I want my students to learn? It's not what assignment am I going to give, what video am I going to show, how in the world am I going to get through this hour? It's no, what do I want my students to learn? It's all about them. They're the focus. They're the reasons why we have an education system. And if they succeed, then this teacher succeeds. And if both of them succeed, then our society is blessed. Let's look at a student's kind of response, perhaps to an overwhelming assignment. Have you ever felt a little bit like this? A lot. Talk to me about that. What type of assignment? Give me like a personal example.
What person is it?
Like personal example of when you had an assignment that made you feel like this.
Oh, like last semester I took one teacher,
Yes.
but he didn't give us any example, and
Mhm.
then we didn't know what to do. Like, we had an assignment, but what should I do? What should I write? Like, it was so vague, and the instruction was not enough for us to understand well. So it was so overwhelming.
That's a really great example, thank you for sharing. Because we're into mastery. We're about student achievement and about students being able to do things, to master skills, to master concepts. However, are there times where teachers, even good teachers, teachers who we like, who are good people, kind of use what's termed mystery learning? Just like, here, mystery. Here's chapter 24. Read it. I'm not going to tell you why. I'm not going to tell you what you're going to do with it. I'm going to test you on it on Friday. Go for it. That's a bit vague. The students get bored. They don't know what they're supposed to get out of it. They have no objectives. They have no aim. And whatever learning does happen, it's limited. We're not into getting through assignments. Assignments are necessary. Assignments, as we'll get into shortly, are about assessing improvement. Without assessments, how in the world is a teacher or even the student supposed to know whether mastery has happened? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes discussing, doing presentations is a form of assessment. But sometimes taking a test, sometimes doing a report shows like, no, I can do this as a student, and it shows the teacher, okay, I can move on. I can confidently say that my students comprehend. But if the students don't meet the objective, then the teacher is doing something wrong. And everyone loses. So, this is a model that I found that talks a little bit about the progression of kind of what a classroom setting, what kind of a curriculum looks like. Have your outcomes, define course goals. This could be for any class. It could be for this class, an education class, it could be for math class, an English class. This model is pretty basic, but good teachers, no matter the subject, no matter the content, are good teachers. Don't get me wrong, content affects the way sometimes we teach, sometimes we present information, but the theories and kind of the proven methods of teaching, of objectives and assignments pretty much holds true no matter what you do. You have objectives, you have rubrics, which are kind of like your curriculum, and you have to remember that curriculum is not something a teacher really designs. A curriculum is something that's given to the teacher by the school district. It's a standard, and we'll get into standards a little bit later. But standard, it's a measure. It's something, think of like an enzyme, using an LDS kind of reference. Like we have our standard works, we have the enzyme to the nations. It's a standard, something we look up to, something that we measure our actions and the actions of others by. And it provides, once again, guidance. Perhaps a little more specific guidance than our outcomes of the class. Then we have our assignments, which are important to make sure that these are actually happening. And then there is a form of assessment, of grading. And it's not just A, B, F. It's really, okay, are my students getting this? Is their comprehension happening? If there's not, then perhaps it's one thing for a teacher to write objectives on the board. It's another thing for students to understand it. So right now I kind of want to talk about and kind of get in partners again about some example of bad objectives. From your personal experience, from off the top of your head, be from any class, any content matter, but talk about it, think about it for a couple minutes, and then we'll share some examples of bad objectives. Because sometimes we learn what to do by knowing what not to do, if that makes any sense. So, go for it.
I think the objective should be measurable. Like the teacher set the objective, but in the end of the lesson, if the teacher cannot assess it, it is bad.
Then we start with Sai, just go down the road. There was a lot of laughing on Kelly's side, and I like that enthusiasm for the discussion. So if one of you could share just your thoughts and just go through.
If there's too much objectives.
Okay.
Overwhelming students.
Completely overwhelmed. Good.
Maybe sometimes there's a better objective to meet the standard you're trying to reach.
So sometimes our objectives don't correlate with our standards.
If the objectives cannot be assessed, like
Yeah. So if it can't be measured, if they're just too vague, too ethereal, too like hypothetical, theoretical, you don't know whether you got the objective, you don't know whether you accomplished it, and is it really up to the teacher to say, you got it? Or, because the objective is something that a student and even a parent, and we'll get to this a little at the end, that a parent of a student should be able to look at an objective without ever attending the class and be able to understand what their child is supposed to do. Without that clarity, how in the world is a parent, for example, Sheila, supposed to help their child with an assignment at home? They can't. If the parent doesn't understand, the student doesn't understand, the student's going to go back to school saying, didn't do it. Or I did it, but I got nothing out of it. Or I did it, and I didn't understand anything.
Or I did it, and I did it my mom's way, and I got it wrong.
That's hard.
Because there's things change, and sometimes what you were taught is different from what your child is being taught. So when they have a clear objective, then, okay, this is how they're going to do this equation, not how I used to do the equations. So you can tell.
Exactly. Amy, you had a comment?
Oh, yeah, and I just thought about, like, good objective should be related, like, closely related to your activities and discussions.
Exactly. So our assignments, we don't find a video, we don't find a worksheet and say, okay, from this I'm going to form my objective. It's kind of the chicken and the egg story. But normally the objective comes first, and it influences in a powerful way the assignment. Because like you said, the assignment's supposed to be measurable, it's supposed to be related, it's supposed to show a level of mastery and comprehension. Let me read something to you from the textbook. When the students have no idea what is to be learned, and the teacher has no idea what is to be taught, no student learning can take place. It sounds pretty obvious, pretty straightforward, but it's pretty profound. But there are so many teachers, so many educators, so many education systems that they don't have objectives, they don't have goals, they don't have outcomes at all. Or if they do, it's in a binder, and no one knows about it. Not even the teacher, because sometimes they weren't given the binder. So it is about this, going back to the beginning, about this relationship of trust and understanding. Teachers and students must understand each other. And if they don't, then I'm sorry, teacher, before you get to your content matter, before you start preparing that student for that test or that project, you need to do icebreakers. You need to form that level of communication and trust. There's just no other way. Because there are too many students, too many bright, brilliant students who are not performing to the best of their ability because of inadequate and faulty objectives. So here, let's talk a little bit about creating an effective assignment. Say you have good objectives. You told them to your students, you wrote it on the board, you had the students write it on their papers. I didn't ask you to do that because you can clearly see that on the board. And even when you go home, perhaps on your homework assignment or your type of assessment, the teacher, it would be good for me to communicate to the parents, like Sheila, that these are the objectives. This is how the assignment works into the whole scheme of comprehension. We're covering a unit in math, or we're covering a topic in history. These are the objectives, and everything just works together. If it doesn't work together, it's just not going to fit. It's not going to work. So let's look at these 4 points first. So create an effective assignment. You determine what your students want to accomplish. Very similar to creating objectives. What do you want your students to learn? What do you want your students to do? Write each accomplishment as a single sentence. Kind of going back to what Sai was saying. Students get overwhelmed. They're not stupid, but they can only process so much information, And if you're trying to go at them at so many different angles at once, especially if they don't have a foundation, a background in what you're talking about, they get lost. If you refer to my objectives, I'm not saying they're the greatest in the world, though for how great they are. They're short, they're sentences, they're clear, they're concise. They have to be. They don't have to be wordy, they shouldn't be a paragraph long. It should be a sentence, which a student could easily jot down and say, okay, we're reading this because of this objective, or I'm going to do this assignment because of this objective. It provides not only aim, it provides motivation. Okay, I'm going to do this because this is going to help me, if I was a student, figure this out. Third point, give the student a copy of the same sentence, okay, or if you have them copy it down, and post or send these sentences home with the students. This is the teacher-student relationship. It's powerful and it must be built on trust. But students don't live at school. They don't. They go home. You have parents who are very concerned and very worried and want to be involved overall in their students' education. Sometimes they don't know how. Why? Because they don't have objectives. They don't know what the aim of the teacher is. They don't know what the aim of the course is. And they don't know how to direct their students. So this helps the parents. This helps the teacher. And these help the students. Everyone wins when we have good objectives and good assignments. Agreed?
Agreed.
Fantastic. So this, does anyone recognize this? This is Bloom's taxonomy. Okay. And you've all heard of Bloom's taxonomy, haven't you?
Yeah.
Could have anyone kind of describe what it's used for? Pass knowledge. Okay, good. Different levels of learning, of comprehension.
When teachers make their objectives, I think using those terms
Mm-hmm.
really helpful for them to like decide what they want their students to accomplish through their lesson.
And that's perfect. That's exactly what I was getting at. Is Bloom's taxonomy is great, colorful, it's picture, but we actually have to use this information. Say, for example, you have a course that's 6 weeks long. If you devote a week, and sometimes they take longer, but say, for example, for argument's sake, each week you devoted one to remember, just remembering the content. Two, just a comprehension. Third level, apply, being able to like find some application, that this isn't just ethereal knowledge, that it's real and it's something that I can understand and grasp. You analyze it, which is very similar to understand, but you analyze it critically. You evaluate it in comparison to other language or other information to kind of create a synthesis, and then you create something. You use those connections to create something new. And this is hard. But exactly like Amy said, if our objectives and if our assignments use this basic model, and there are so many different types of models, this is only one example which I personally like, students will be so successful. Because they won't be overwhelmed when they're challenged to create, when they haven't first learned to understand the information. Or they won't be able to analyze if they can't even remember it. It's not fair, it's not efficient, but with these steps, focusing on the objectives, giving good assignments, it works. It really, really does. And that's kind of one of the basic message of this lesson is just teaching works. Teaching's hard, it requires preparation, but in a very real sense, it's worth it, and teaching can be very effective if you use the proper objectives and have the proper assignments. So we have to remember, wrapping up, that we have to act. Learning is not passive. A teacher cannot just stand up here and lecture and expect you to reach the 6th level of Bloom's taxonomy to create. It's about having those objectives. It's about having the students act through their assignments, through assessing them, to allowing them to show their creativity. Sometimes we think that standardized testing or curriculum or even a syllabus is constricting, that it binds students, it doesn't allow them to express themselves or to reach their full potential. But the inverse is actually true. when the curriculum, when the syllabus, when the objectives, and when the daily assignments in class work together properly, it creates an effective learning environment that benefits the teacher, the students, and the parents. So remember this, action changes things. And as a teacher, I don't want to just have assignments, have you do them. I don't want you to just watch a video. I don't want you to just read a chapter in a book. I want to explain why you're doing this, what it will help you with, and make sure it matches the objectives. And if it doesn't, then perhaps the objectives are wrong. And it's something that the teacher and the students together in that relationship need to figure out. And to close, I'd like to look at this, bringing back to our Latter-day Saint kind of culture. The motto of BYU Hawaii is enter to learn, go forth, to serve. In a very real sense, that is our charge. That is our objective. Whether we stay here for 1 semester or 50. That is our objective, that is our goal. We're here to learn. What does that entail? Well, individual teachers need to create objectives. They need to give assignments. And then we need to assess ourselves and be assessed by our peers and by the Lord, whether we are capable to go out to really serve and start the whole process again. Because as you serve, you learn more. So I hope that all of you can kind of take away from this lesson, this really short presentation, that objectives are important. Sometimes they're hard, but keep it simple. Keep it very simple. Specificity means everything. And by using proper objectives and assignments, I know that you as students and as teachers will be very successful.